Move faster, Brennan. I don't have all night. The voice cut through the sterile quiet of the 40th floor, sharp as chipped ice. Orson Baird didn't flinch, his hands moving in a steady, practiced rhythm as he guided the buffer over the polished concrete floor. The machine's low hum was a familiar friend, a sound that drowned out the world. Most of the time. From the hallway, through the seamless glass wall of the main conference room, he could see them. Genevieve Ardeen, COO of Viridian Dynamics, stood with her arms crossed, a silhouette of impatient power against the glittering city lights. Her black dress was severe, her posture unforgiving. Opposite her, Brennan Keller, the company's head of IT, fumbled with a tablet, his face slick with a sheen of nervous sweat under the recessed lighting. "Of course, Genevieve. Just pulling up the final projection," Brennan stammered, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. "As you can see, the Aegis system is more than a firewall. It's a predictive, quantum-encrypted fortress. It's unbreachable. We ran every simulation, threw everything at it. Nothing gets through." He gestured to the massive smartboard on the wall. A complex architectural diagram glowed there, a web of lines, nodes, and color-coded pathways that would be meaningless to most people. But Orson wasn't most people. He paused his buffer, his body going still behind the tinted glass partition, shielded by the dim lighting of the corridor. His eyes fixed on the diagram. A junior analyst in the room, a young woman who looked barely old enough to be out of college, cleared her throat. "Sir, I did flag one anomaly in the source authentication protocol. It's probably nothing, but the encryption handshake seems to reroute through an external validation server that isn't on our registered list. It's almost like you're a junior analyst and I'm the head of the department." Brennan cut her off with a condescending smile. He waved a dismissive hand at the screen. "It's a redundant failsafe, designed to handle overflow requests. It's proprietary, cutting edge. You wouldn't understand the theory." Genevieve's gaze narrowed slightly, but she didn't intervene. She trusted her department heads to manage their people. "So, you're telling me the source code for our new AI platform, the single most valuable asset this company has ever produced, is secure behind this system?" "I'd bet my career on it," Brennan declared, his confidence returning. Aegis is a masterpiece. A cold knot tightened in Orson's stomach. He wasn't looking at the whole diagram anymore. His focus had narrowed to a single point in the upper quadrant, a cluster of code that Brennan had brushed off as a failsafe. It wasn't a failsafe. It wasn't proprietary. It was a ghost. He knew every line of that protocol. He knew its elegant efficiency, its deceptive simplicity. He knew the hidden vulnerability coiled within it like a snake in the grass. He knew it because he had written it more than a decade ago, in a different life, under a different name. It was his signature, his sin, and it was a back door, a catastrophic, wide-open door that could bring the entire company to ruin. The meeting ended. Genevieve gave a curt nod and swept out of the room, her heels clicking with sharp finality on the floor. Brennan and his team began packing up, their relief palpable. Brennan laughed at something someone said, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. He swiped a hand across the smartboard, but in his haste, he didn't erase it completely. A faint, ghostly image of the architecture remained. Orson waited. He watched them leave, one by one, until the floor fell silent again, leaving only the low hum of the building's life support and the frantic beating of his own heart. He pushed his buffer cart to the side, his movements slow, deliberate. He walked to the conference room door and pushed it open. The air inside was still warm, smelling of coffee and anxiety. He stood before the whiteboard, staring at the ghost of his own creation. The failsafe was a lie. Brennan Keller was either a fool or a traitor. He had taken Orson's original clean design and bolted on a corrupted black market version of it. A version that contained the flaw he'd spent years hoping would never see the light of day. He ran a hand over his face, the rough calluses of a janitor scraping against his skin. For 11 years, he had been a ghost. Orson Baird, The quiet man who cleaned up other people's messes, who lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment, whose entire world consisted of his 10-year-old daughter, Piper. He had chosen this life. He had chosen silence and invisibility as his penance and his protection. But looking at the screen, he realized the silence was about to be broken. If that code went live, Viridian Dynamics wouldn't just be breached. It would be gutted. Client data, financial records, the AI source code, all of it would be stolen. The company would collapse. Thousands of people who worked in this very building, would lose their jobs. People like him. He backed away from the board, his breath catching in his throat. He had a choice. Stay silent, stay safe, and watch the world burn. Or reach back into a past he had sworn to leave behind and become the one thing he never wanted to be again. A name echoed in the deepest part of his memory, a name he hadn't even thought in years. Nix. He turned and walked out of the conference room, his steps quiet but firm. He had one more floor to clean, and then he had to go home. He had work to do. The number 72 bus hissed to a stop, its brakes groaning in the damp night air. Orson stepped off and walked the 2 blocks to his apartment building, the city's late-night symphony a familiar backdrop to the storm in his mind. The lobby smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach, a world away from the ozonic, moneyed air of Viridian's 40th floor. He let himself into his apartment as quietly as possible. The only light came from the small lamp on the end table, casting a warm, golden glow across the living room. Piper was asleep on the couch, her textbook on ancient civilizations fallen to the floor beside her. One arm was flung over her head, her chest rising and falling in the steady, untroubled rhythm of childhood. Orson knelt beside her, his heart aching with a fierce, protective love that was the anchor of his life. He gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead. This was why he did it. This was why he mopped floors and emptied trash cans. For her peace, for her safety. The world that had almost consumed him, the world of digital ghosts and high-stakes warfare fought in lines of code, had no place here. He carefully lifted her into his arms. She stirred, murmuring something in her sleep, and snuggled against his chest. He carried her to her room, the walls of which were covered in her drawings. Fantastical creatures, detailed maps of imaginary lands, a portrait of him where he was smiling wider than he ever did in real life. He tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I love you, Pip." He closed her door softly and stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening. The weight of his decision pressed down on him. Reaching back into his past meant risking this, risking her. But doing nothing felt like a different kind of betrayal. It meant letting a man like Brennan Keller's arrogance destroy the livelihoods of thousands, all while Orson stood by, knowing he was the only one who could stop it. He walked into his own bedroom, a sparse room with little more than a bed, a dresser, and a single, locked closet. He knelt and unlocked it. It wasn't filled with clothes. It was mostly empty, save for a few boxes of his late wife's belongings and, in the very back, under a faded wool blanket, a sleek black laptop case. He pulled it out. The case was cold to the touch. He hadn't opened it in 11 years. He carried it to the small kitchen table, the worn linoleum cool beneath his feet. He sat down, took a deep breath, and unzipped it. The laptop was a custom build, a relic from his old life. No branding, a matte black finish, its surfaces smooth and unadorned. It had no internet history, no personal files, no connection to Orson Baird whatsoever. It was a sterile surgical instrument. It was Nix's machine. He plugged it in and flipped open the lid. The screen flickered to life, asking for a password. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, stiff and uncertain for a moment. Then, muscle memory took over. A 64-character alphanumeric string flowed from his fingertips, a password he had never written down, a key forged in paranoia and burned into his brain. The desktop appeared. It was stark, just a black screen with a single, encrypted terminal window. No icons, no wallpaper. Just the tool. For a second, he felt a dizzying rush, a flicker of the power he once wielded. The man who could walk through digital walls, who could unravel corporate secrets from half a world away. The man they called Nix. He pushed the feeling down. Nix was a ghost, a dangerous one. He began to work. He didn't hack into Viridian's system. That would leave a trace, no matter how skilled he was. Instead, he would send a warning so specific, so technically dense, that no competent security analyst could ignore it. He needed to give them a map to the bomb without revealing who he was. He started typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and confidence that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. He detailed the vulnerability in the Aegis protocol. He explained how the corrupted authentication handshake could be exploited to create a persistent, undetectable root access. He used terminology and referenced exploits so obscure that only a handful of people in the world would even understand them. He was writing in a language he had tried to forget. He constructed a new, temporary email address through a chain of anonymizing proxies, bouncing the signal through servers in half a dozen countries before it would finally land in a single inbox at Viridian Dynamics. Not Genevieve's, not Brennan Keller's. He chose his target carefully, a mid-level security analyst named Alani Sharma. He'd seen her name on internal memos. She was young, sharp, and from what he'd overheard, ambitious. She wouldn't just delete an email from an unknown source. She would be curious. He wrote a single line in the subject field, a question about Aegis Subprotocol 7. The body of the email contained no greeting, no threats, no explanation. Just 3 paragraphs of pure, undiluted technical data, a poison pill of information. He read it over once, twice. It was perfect. Anonymous, untraceable, undeniable. His finger hovered over the send key. This was it. The point of no return. Once he sent this, a part of Nix would be loose in the world again. A whisper from the grave. He thought of Piper, sleeping soundly in her room. He thought of the smug look on Brennan Keller's face. He clicked send. The email vanished from his screen, sent out into the silent, sleeping world. He watched the empty terminal for a long moment, then closed the laptop. The click of the lid sounded like a cell door shutting. He unplugged it, placed it back in its case, and locked it away in the closet. He walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the quiet street. The world was exactly as it had been 5 minutes ago. But for Orson, everything had changed. He had just thrown a stone into the calm, deep waters of his hidden life. And now, all he could do was wait for the ripples to reach the shore. The fluorescent lights of Viridian's Security Operations Center hummed with an unnatural intensity at 7:15 in the morning. Alani Sharma, nursing her first coffee of the day, clicked through her inbox, deleting spam and flagging departmental updates. She almost swiped past it. A question about Aegis Subprotocol 7. The sender was an unpronounceable string of letters and numbers, probably just another automated system alert. She was about to delete it when curiosity got the better of her. She clicked it open. There was no greeting, no signature, just 3 paragraphs of text that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She read it once, her brow furrowed in confusion. The terminology was dense, almost academic. She read it a second time, her coffee forgotten, a cold dread seeping into her stomach. She grabbed a notepad and began to cross-reference the terms with the Aegis core documentation. Most of them weren't in there. They were from a deeper level of security theory, concepts she'd only read about in white papers from fringe experts. One phrase in particular made her blood run cold. Results in a persistent phantom node vulnerability via recursive credential spoofing. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No way." She abandoned her desk and hurried over to the lead architect's cubicle. "Liam, you need to see this." Liam, A veteran programmer with 20 years of experience sighed. "Alani, I haven't even finished my bagel. What is it?" "Just read it." She forwarded him the email. He scanned it, his expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief, and then to outright panic. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. "It just appeared. In my inbox, anonymous. This is describing a catastrophic failure mode." Liam hissed, pulling up the Aegis source code. "If this is true, Keller's fortress is made of cardboard." Within 30 minutes, the entire security operations center was in a state of controlled chaos. Keyboards clattered furiously. Programmers huddled in hushed, frantic groups. They ran simulations based on the anonymous email's information. Every single one came back with the same result: a complete system breach in under 90 seconds. The anonymous ghost was right. Genevieve Ardeen was in her penthouse office on the 48th floor, reviewing market projections, when her private line buzzed. It was Liam. His voice was strained. "Genevieve, we have a situation, a code red. It's Aegis." She was in the SOC 5 minutes later. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Liam walked her through the anonymous email and the results of their simulations. She listened without interruption, her face an unreadable mask of calm, but her eyes were like chips of flint. "So, to be clear," she said when he was finished, her voice dangerously quiet, "we were days away from migrating our entire company's intellectual property onto a system with a back door a mile wide." "Yes," Liam admitted, not meeting her eyes. "And our multi-million-dollar internal audit missed it. Our external consultants missed it. Brennan Keller, who bet his career on this, missed it." She paused. "But some anonymous person, sending an email from a ghost address, found it." "It would appear so," Liam said. Genevieve turned to look at the controlled chaos of the room. Her mind was racing. The immediate threat had to be contained. The migration would be halted. The Aegis system would be quarantined. But the second, more troubling question lingered. Who sent the email? Who was this ghost in the machine who had just saved her company from utter ruin? It wasn't a rival corporation. They would have exploited the flaw, not reported it. This was a white hat, a brilliant one. "I want to know who sent this," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that carried more authority than a shout. "Scrub the metadata. Trace the proxies. I want every resource we have on it. Find me this ghost." Down on the 17th floor, Orson was emptying a recycling bin. He moved through the cubicles with his practiced invisibility, a silent fixture in the corporate landscape. He could feel the change in the building's atmosphere. The usual morning buzz was replaced by a low, anxious hum. People spoke in hushed tones. IT staff hurried through the hallways with grim, set faces. He overheard snippets of conversation, halted the Aegis migration, some kind of critical flaw. Came from an anonymous tip. Can you believe it? Orson kept his head down, his expression placid, his hands steady. He emptied the bin and moved on to the next one. Inside, he was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Relief, sharp and clean, that they had listened. But beneath it, a growing sense of dread. He had wanted to warn them, not to start a manhunt. Genevieve Ardeen was not a woman who let mysteries go unsolved. She would hunt for nicks with the same relentless precision she applied to everything else. He was polishing the brass handle on a service elevator when Brennan Keller stormed past, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He was shouting into his phone. "I don't care what the simulations say. It's a hoax. Someone is trying to sabotage my project. Someone internal. Find them." Orson watched him go, a flicker of something cold and satisfying passing through him. He had taken the first shot, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the war was just beginning. And he, the janitor, the ghost, was standing right in the middle of the battlefield. A week passed. The initial panic at Viridian Dynamics subsided into a tense, simmering state of high alert. The Aegis project was officially under review, a corporate euphemism for being dissected in a digital autopsy. Brennan Keller was conspicuously absent from high-level meetings, his bravado replaced by a sullen, defensive posture. And the hunt for the ghost continued. Genevieve Ardeen was relentless. She had her best forensic team working around the clock, but they kept hitting dead ends. The anonymous email was a digital masterpiece of evasion. The proxy chain was too complex, the encryption on the source server too layered. The ghost had covered their tracks perfectly. "There's nothing, Genevieve," the head of forensics told her in a morning briefing. "No IP fragments, no linguistic tics that match any known hackers. Whoever this is, they're a pro. A ghost. Just like you said." Genevieve stared out the window of her office, her jaw tight. "No one is a ghost. Everyone leaves a trace. Keep digging." Her obsession with the anonymous savior was becoming all-consuming. It wasn't just about security anymore. It was about the sheer, breathtaking competence of it. In a company filled with highly paid experts, the one person who saw the truth was someone who asked for nothing in return. It was an act of pure, unadulterated integrity. And in her world, that was rarer than any precious metal. It was during that second week that her path crossed with Orson's in a way it never had before. She was working late, striding through a deserted hallway on the 38th floor, when she dropped her security badge. It skittered across the polished floor and came to rest near the base of a potted plant. As she bent to retrieve it, another hand got there first. "Here you are, Ms. Ardeen." She looked up. It was the janitor, the quiet one she'd seen 100 times, but never truly noticed. His eyes were downcast, his expression neutral. He held the badge out to her. "Thank you," she said, taking it. For a split second, her fingers brushed against his. His hand was rough, calloused, the hand of a man who worked. She found herself looking at his face, really looking. He wasn't old, maybe early 40s. There was a quiet stillness about him she hadn't registered before, an intelligence in his eyes that seemed at odds with his uniform. "Orson, isn't it?" she asked, surprising herself. She didn't make a habit of knowing the cleaning staff's names. He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his own eyes. "Yes, ma'am." "You work late every night," she stated, more of an observation than a question. "My daughter's school schedule," he said simply. "It works better this way." And that was it. He gave a slight nod and moved on with his cart, his movements economical and silent. Genevieve stood there for a moment, watching him go. It was a completely forgettable interaction. Yet for some reason, it stuck with her. My daughter's school schedule. There was a whole life in that simple phrase, a world of responsibility and care that existed entirely outside these glass and steel walls. Meanwhile, Orson's life outside the tower continued its steady rhythm. He walked Piper to the bus stop every morning and met her there every afternoon. That day she was quieter than usual, kicking at a loose stone on the sidewalk. "What's up, Pip?" he asked, adjusting her backpack on her shoulder. "Some kids at school were making fun of my drawing," she mumbled, not looking at him. "They said the griffin's wings were on wrong." "Were they?" Orson asked gently. "No. I told them it was a specific subspecies from the northern rim of Xanthia, where the gravitational pull is weaker, so their musculoskeletal structure is different." Orson had to hide a smile. She was his child, through and through. "And what did they say to that?" "They called me a weirdo." Her voice was small. He stopped and knelt in front of her, forcing her to look at him. "Hey, being smart isn't a flaw. Seeing things other people don't see? That's a gift. Don't ever let anyone make you feel bad for it. Understand?" She nodded, a bit of the light returning to her eyes. "So I shouldn't draw a normal griffin?" "Heck no," Orson said, standing up and taking her hand. "You draw your griffin. You make its wings exactly how you know they should be. The right people will get it. The ones who don't, they don't matter." She squeezed his hand. "Okay, Dad." As they walked on, Orson felt a pang of hypocrisy. He was telling his daughter to be proud of her unique way of seeing the world, while he was doing everything in his power to hide his. He was living a lie to keep her safe. But was he also teaching her to be ashamed of who he was? The thought gnawed at him as he started his shift that night. He felt the walls of his anonymous life closing in. The investigation at Viridian was relentless. Whispers of Keller pointing fingers, of internal reviews, of lie detector tests for the entire Aegis team. Orson knew it was only a matter of time before Genevieve's search expanded. He was in the executive break room, wiping down the counters, when Brennan Keller walked in, looking harried. He didn't even see Orson. He was on the phone, his voice a low, vicious hiss. "I don't care what it takes. The leak came from inside. Find out who has a grudge against me. Look into everyone, the coders, the admins. Hell, check the security guards, the cleaning crew. Someone talked. Someone is trying to sink me." He slammed the phone down and grabbed a bottle of water, his knuckles white. He finally seemed to notice Orson standing there. He gave him a look of utter disdain, a look that dismissed him as nothing more than a piece of furniture. "What are you looking at?" Brennan sneered. "Get back to work." Orson said nothing. He just dipped his head, picked up his spray bottle, and turned back to the counter. But as he wiped away the smudges, he met his own eyes in the reflective surface of the chrome refrigerator. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A cold, quiet anger. Brennan Keller saw a janitor. Genevieve Ardeen saw a ghost. Piper saw Dad. And he wasn't sure who he was anymore, but he knew he couldn't let a man like Keller win. The net was closing, and Orson realized he couldn't just keep running. He had to figure out how to fight back from the shadows. The third week began with a breakthrough. Genevieve's forensic team, bleary-eyed and fueled by caffeine, found something. It wasn't in the email's metadata or the proxy chain. It was in the language itself. "It's the phrasing," a young analyst named Kenji explained, pointing at a line of code projected on the boardroom screen. "This specific syntax for describing a recursive loop. It's flawless, but it's archaic. It's like finding a perfect Latin sentence in a modern blog post." "What does that mean?" Genevieve asked, leaning forward. "It means our ghost isn't some kid in a basement. They're old school. They learned to code in a different era. The syntax is almost identical to the core programming of a small cybersecurity firm, Viridian, acquired 12 years ago. A company called Sinosure." Genevieve's eyes lit up. "A lead. A real one. Pull the employee files from the Sinosure acquisition. I want to know everyone who worked on their security protocols. Cross-reference them with our current and past employee databases. I want every name." The net had just been cast wider, but also finer. Orson knew nothing of this development. His days remained a carefully balanced routine of fatherhood and invisibility. He helped Piper build a diorama of the Nile River for a school project, using clay for the riverbanks and blue-tinted resin for the water. As they worked, she chattered about her day. "Genevieve was at school today," she said, meticulously placing a tiny papyrus reed. Orson froze. "Genevieve? Ms. Ardeen. Yeah, she was there for career day. She's on the school board or something?" She talked about being a CEO. Piper paused, looking up at him. "She's really tall." Orson's mind raced. Genevieve Ardeen, at his daughter's school. It was just a coincidence. It had to be. But the feeling of two worlds colliding sent a jolt of anxiety through him. "What else did she say?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Just stuff about working hard. But then she came over to our table to look at the projects. She said my Xanthian griffin was structurally fascinating." Piper beamed. "See, Dad? The right people get it." Orson felt a strange mix of pride and terror. Genevieve had spoken to his daughter. She had been just feet away from the one thing in the world he was trying to protect. That night, the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. He felt Genevieve's presence on the executive floor long before he saw her. When she stepped out of her office, she wasn't heading for the elevators. She walked toward him. "Orson," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Ms. Ardeen," he replied, stopping his work. "I was at Northwood Elementary today. For career day." He just nodded. his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. "I saw your daughter's artwork. Piper, is it?" "Yes. She's very talented and very bright." She explained the entire biomechanical theory behind her griffin's wing structure. A small, genuine smile touched Genevieve's lips. "I was impressed." "She's a good kid," Orson managed to say, his throat dry. Genevieve's smile faded. Her gaze was intense, searching. "She gets her intelligence from her father, I imagine?" It wasn't a question. It was a probe. A test. Orson's training, his years of living as a ghost, screamed at him to deflect, to be bland, to be invisible. "I just try to make sure she does her homework," he said, his voice flat. Genevieve held his gaze for a long moment. It felt like an eternity. She was looking for a crack, a flicker of something behind the janitor's placid mask. He gave her nothing. Finally, she nodded, as if coming to a decision. "Well, you're doing a good job," she said, and turned and walked away. Orson let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It had been too close. She was circling him. He didn't know why, but he could feel her suspicion like a change in air pressure. His feeling was right. Back in her office, Genevieve was staring at a list of names on her screen. The Cynosure employee files. Most were still in the industry, working for competitors or heading their own firms, but one name was an anomaly. Baird Orson, lead protocol architect. Resigned May 2014. Reason, personal. No forwarding address, no subsequent employment history in the tech sector. Orson Baird, the janitor. The quiet man with the intelligent eyes and the brilliant daughter. The man who worked at the company but wasn't part of it. The man who had every reason to be invisible. "It can't be," she whispered to the empty room. It was insane. It was impossible. A lead architect for a top security firm doesn't just vanish and reappear 11 years later mopping floors. But the ghost was brilliant. The ghost was old school. The ghost knew Viridian's history, and Orson Baird had been in the right place, at the right time, with a daughter who attended the same school Genevieve just happened to visit. Coincidence was a word she didn't believe in. She pulled up the building's security logs. She cross-referenced Orson's work schedule with the exact time the anonymous email was sent. He had clocked out 90 minutes before. It was possible. He would have had just enough time to get home and send it. She leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. If he was the ghost? Why? Why give up a career like that? And why help her now? She looked at the photo on her desk, a picture of her with her own father, the company's founder. He had always told her, character isn't who you are when people are watching. It's who you are when you think no one is. The janitor. The man no one watched. She picked up her phone. She knew what she had to do next. This wasn't something her team could handle. This required a direct approach. She had to confront the ghost herself. The summons came the next afternoon via a polite call from HR. "Ms. Ardeen would like to see you in her office at the end of your shift tonight." No reason was given. None was needed. Orson spent the rest of his shift in a cold, focused calm. The moment he had been dreading for years had finally arrived. He moved through the motions of his job, cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash, buffing floors. But his mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios, preparing his defenses. He thought about just walking out, getting on a bus with Piper and disappearing again. But he couldn't. This was Piper's home. He couldn't make her a ghost, too. At 11 p.m., he put his card away, washed his hands, and took the elevator to the 48th floor. The executive wing was silent, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of his footsteps. The door to Genevieve's office was ajar. He knocked softly. "Come in." She was standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city. She turned as he entered, her expression unreadable. The room was vast, intimidating, a cathedral of corporate power. Orson felt small in his simple work uniform. "Orson, thank you for coming. she said. "Please, have a seat." He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, waiting. Genevieve walked over to her desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. "I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to solve a puzzle. I was looking for a ghost, a brilliant programmer who saved this company from a catastrophic failure and then vanished without a trace." Orson's face remained a blank canvas. He said nothing. "My team hit dead ends everywhere we looked," she continued, her eyes fixed on him. "The ghost was too good, too clean. But ghosts leave traces, don't they? Little echoes of who they used to be." She placed the paper on the desk. It was a printout of an old employee file. At the top, he could see the logo for Signature Security and his own name. "A lead architect for one of the most respected boutique security firms in the country," she said softly. "A prodigy, they called you. They gave you a nickname, didn't they? What was it?" The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Orson's heart was a hammer in his chest. This was it. The precipice. "Nix," he said, his voice raspy. The name felt like a foreign object in his mouth. A flicker of triumph, quickly suppressed, crossed Genevieve's face. "Nix, the god of night." Fitting. She leaned against her desk, her arms crossed. "So, the question isn't who you are anymore, Orson. The question is why. Why is a man like Nix cleaning my floors?" He finally looked at her, his carefully constructed walls of invisibility crumbling. He owed her this much. The truth. "Because Nix almost got people killed," he said, his voice low and raw with the memory. "I designed a security system for a financial firm. A competitor paid a fortune to have it cracked. They didn't just want data. They wanted to cause a panic. They hired a black hat group to exploit a theoretical flaw I had warned the firm about. A flaw they chose not to patch because it was too expensive." He took a shaky breath. "The breach caused a market crash. A small one, but big enough. People lost their life savings. One man, a broker at the firm who was blamed for the oversight, he drove his car off a bridge. He left behind a wife and 2 kids. Genevieve's expression softened, the hard lines of the CEO replaced by something more human. "I created the gun," Orson continued, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I didn't pull the trigger, but I made it possible. My work, something I was proud of, was twisted into a weapon. My wife had just passed away. I had a baby daughter. I looked at this world I was a part of, this digital arms race, and I couldn't be a part of it anymore. So I took my daughter and I disappeared. I chose a job where I couldn't hurt anyone, a job where no one would ever look for a man like Nix." He finally met her eyes, his own shining with unshed tears. "I didn't do it for you or for this company. I saw what Keller was doing, using a corrupted piece of my old work. I did it because I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again. I couldn't let another ghost be created because of my code." The room was silent save for the hum of the city far below. Genevieve stared at him, seeing him for the first time. Not as a janitor, not as a ghost, but as a man who had sacrificed everything for a principle. A man broken by his own integrity. "Keller," she said, her voice firm again. "The CIO returning. He used a black market version of your code, didn't he? To cut costs." Orson nodded. "It's the only explanation for that specific vulnerability being present." "Can you prove it? On a system with full access?" "Yes. I can show you the exact lines where the authentic code was spliced with the corrupted version. It would be undeniable." Genevieve stood up straight, a new kind of fire in her eyes. It wasn't just about a security flaw anymore. It was about justice. "Tomorrow morning," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "there will be a special meeting of the board's technical committee. Brennan Keller will be there, and so will you." Orson's stomach lurched. "As what?" "The janitor." "No," Genevieve said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "You'll be there as a consultant. You'll be there as Nix, and you are going to show them exactly who has been cleaning up the real messes in this company." The air in the 45th floor boardroom was thick with tension and the smell of expensive coffee. The members of the board's technical committee, A group of stern-faced men and women who held the company's fate in their hands sat around a polished mahogany table. Brennan Keller was at the far end, looking smug. He believed this meeting was a formality to approve his revised, and now secure, Aegis plan. Genevieve stood at the head of the table, radiating a calm, lethal authority. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Before we discuss the future of the Aegis project, I want to address the circumstances of the initial flaw. We've brought in an independent cybersecurity consultant to provide a final analysis. She nodded toward the door. It opened, and Orson walked in. He wore a simple, clean button-down shirt and dark pants, clothes he'd bought that morning in a pre-dawn panic. He felt exposed, a fraud in this room of titans. Then he caught Genevieve's eye. She gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. You belong here. The gesture steadied him. Brennan Keller scoffed audibly as Orson took a seat at a terminal set up at the side of the room. Is this a joke, Genevieve? Who is this? This, Genevieve said, her voice like steel, is the man who saved your career, Brennan. Though I doubt you'll be thanking him. She gestured to Orson. Mr. Baird, if you would. Orson turned to the terminal. His hands, which had been trembling slightly, grew steady as they found the keyboard. This was his world. He brought up the core code of the Aegis system on the main screen. The vulnerability in the Aegis protocol was not a simple bug or an oversight. Orson began, his voice quiet but clear, echoing slightly in the silent room. It was a deliberate feature of a compromised black market version of a well-known security architecture. He typed a series of commands, and lines of code began to scroll across the screen, highlighted in different colors. The authentic protocol, which I'll highlight in green, is clean. But here, he highlighted a section in red. You can see where it was spliced. This red code introduces a validation handshake that appears legitimate, but it's actually a Trojan. It creates a ghost network interface that grants root access to any party who knows the corresponding key. Brennan Keller shot to his feet. This is ridiculous. This man is a janitor. What could he possibly know about quantum encryption? He knows who wrote the original code, Brennan, Genevieve said smoothly, because he is the one who wrote it. A stunned silence fell over the room. The board members stared, first at Genevieve, then at Orson, then at the sputtering head of IT. That's impossible, Brennan stammered. Orson ignored him. He kept typing. Mr. Keller cut corners. The licensed version of this protocol is expensive. The black market version is cheap, but it comes with a price. The sellers keep a key for themselves. He hit a final command. A log file appeared on the screen. This is the access log from the external server the protocol was communicating with. It shows 3 separate pings in the last month from an IP address registered to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. A company known to be a front for a black hat collective. They were testing the back door, waiting for the system to go live. The evidence was absolute. Damning. The room was silent as a tomb. Brennan Keller's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He sank back into his chair, defeated. Brennan, one of the board members said, his voice cold with fury. You have 5 minutes to clear out your desk. Security will escort you from the building. Keller opened and closed his mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. He simply nodded, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of the room, his career a smoldering ruin. After he was gone, the board members all turned to Orson. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a mixture of awe and disbelief. Mr. Baird, the chairman said, clearing his throat, on behalf of this board, we owe you a debt of gratitude we can scarcely comprehend. Orson simply nodded. He felt no triumph, only a quiet, profound sense of relief. The ghost of his past had been confronted, not with violence or anger, but with simple, irrefutable truth. Later that afternoon, Genevieve found him in the empty boardroom, staring out the window. The terminal had been powered down. The battle was over. How do you feel? She asked softly, coming to stand beside him. Quiet, he said. "For the first time in a long time." "That was impressive, Orson. You didn't just expose him. You educated the entire board in 10 minutes. He gave a small, sad smile. "It's what I used to do. Teach." He finally turned from the window to face her. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, her expression serious, "we fix the company. And I make you an offer." She took a breath. "I'm shutting down the old IT security division. I'm building a new one from the ground up, a threat analysis and predictive integrity group. I want you to run it." Orson stared at her, stunned. "Me? Genevieve, I haven't been in this world for over a decade. I'm not a manager." "I'm not looking for a manager," she countered. "I'm looking for a founder. I'm looking for someone with character, someone who understands that security isn't about building higher walls. It's about understanding why people want to climb them in the first place." She stepped closer. "I'm looking for a man who would rather be a janitor than compromise his integrity. That man is more valuable to this company than 100 Brennan Kellers." He was speechless. An hour ago, he was a janitor. Now he was being offered a senior executive position. The speed of it was dizzying. I have to think about it," he said. "It's not just me. I have my daughter to consider." "Of course," Genevieve said, her voice softening. "Take your time. But Orson, it's time to come out of the shadows. You've earned it." She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw past the CEO. He saw the woman who had trusted a ghost, who had bet her own reputation on the word of a janitor. He saw the woman who had looked at his daughter's drawing and seen not a mistake, but a fascinating possibility. "Thank you, Genevieve," he said, and the words came from a place deeper than just gratitude. It was a place of recognition. A quiet man and a powerful woman, standing together in the aftermath of a silent war, realizing they were more alike than either of them could have ever imagined. Orson walked home that evening in a daze. The city lights seemed brighter, the sounds sharper. The world felt new, tilted on its axis. He let himself into the apartment to the smell of garlic and tomatoes. Piper was standing on a stool in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. "Hey, Dad, you're home early," she said, grinning. "I started dinner. Hope that's okay." "It's more than okay, Pip," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He walked over and hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "It's perfect." "Whoa, easy on the squeeze," she giggled. "You'll make me spill." He let go and leaned against the counter, watching her. His daughter, so capable, so full of light. Genevieve's offer wasn't just about a job or money. It was about this. It was about giving Piper a life where her father wasn't exhausted from working 2 shifts. A life where he could be present. A life where she could be proud of him not just for who he was, but for what he did. "I had an interesting day at work," he said, his voice casual. "Did Mr. Henderson finally fix the leaky faucet in the 3rd-floor men's room?" she asked, not looking up from her stirring. "Something like that," he chuckled. "I was offered a new job, Piper, a different one." She stopped stirring and turned to him, her eyes wide. "A new job? Like not cleaning?" "Like not cleaning," he confirmed. "It's an office job, a computer job, the kind I used to have a long, long time ago." Piper's face broke into a huge smile. "Really? Does that mean you won't have to work all night anymore? Does that mean we can have dinner together every day?" The simple, hopeful questions hit him harder than any boardroom confrontation. "Yeah, Pip," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Yeah, it does." She let out a whoop of joy and threw her arms around his waist. "That's the best news ever!" He held her tight, burying his face in her hair. This was the answer. This was all that mattered. The next day, he met Genevieve in a small, quiet park near the Viridian Tower. The city buzzed around them, but here, under the shade of a large oak tree, it felt peaceful. "I'll take the job," he said without preamble. A slow smile spread across Genevieve's face. "I'm glad." "But I have conditions," he added. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening." "First, my title is flexible, but my hours are not." I leave every day at 3 p.m. to pick up my daughter from school. No exceptions, no meetings after 2:30. She comes first, always. Done, Genevieve said without hesitation. Second, my team is my team. I choose them. I need people who think differently, not just people with the right resumes. I want the curious ones, the stubborn ones, the ones who aren't afraid to be called weirdos. He smiled, thinking of Piper. You'll have full autonomy, she agreed. And third, he said, looking at her directly, I'm not a corporate guy, Genevieve. I don't play politics. I don't do schmoozing. I will give you the unvarnished truth every single time, even when you don't want to hear it. Her smile widened. Orson, that's not a condition. That's precisely why I'm hiring you. She extended a hand. Do we have a deal? He took her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm soft. It felt less like a business transaction and more like a pact. We have a deal. They stood there for a moment, their hands clasped. The line between boss and employee, between CEO and janitor, had vanished. They were just two people, Orson and Genevieve, who had found an unlikely trust in the middle of a corporate crisis. That evening, Genevieve was looking through Orson's old Cynosure file again when she saw a note at the bottom. It was a memo from his former boss. Baird is a genius, but his true value isn't his code. It's his perspective. He sees the human element in the machine. He understands that every vulnerability, every threat starts and ends with people. Genevieve leaned back, a thought taking shape in her mind. She hadn't just hired a cybersecurity expert. She had hired a corporate philosopher, a man who might be able to fix more than just their firewalls. He might be able to fix their culture. A few weeks later, she found an excuse to visit Orson's new department. It didn't look like any other part of Viridian. The walls were covered in whiteboards filled with complex diagrams and what looked like philosophical questions. The team he had assembled was a motley crew of brilliant misfits, just as he'd promised. And in the middle of it all was Orson, not at a desk, but walking around, talking to each person, listening intently. He looked happy. He looked like he was home. She caught his eye and beckoned him over. I wanted to ask you something, she said, keeping her voice low. My foundation is hosting a charity gala for youth STEM programs. I was wondering if you and Piper would be my guests. Orson was taken aback. A gala? Genevieve, I don't own a tux. I'm not sure that's our scene. They have rentals, she said with a gentle smile, and Piper might enjoy it. There's a whole exhibit on interactive robotics. She paused. I'd really like it if you were there. He looked at her, at the genuine hope in her eyes, and found he couldn't say no. It wasn't his boss asking. It was a woman who was quickly becoming his friend. Okay, Genevieve, he said. We'll be there. As she walked away, he realized his life was changing in ways he had never anticipated. He had spent a decade building walls to keep the world out. And now, one by one, a sharp, brilliant, and unexpectedly kind CEO was helping him tear them down. The night of the gala arrived, a swirl of black ties, shimmering gowns, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Orson stood awkwardly near the entrance, feeling like a crow in a flock of peacocks, even in his rented tuxedo. But then he looked down at Piper, and his awkwardness melted away. She was wearing a simple dark blue dress they had picked out together. Her eyes were wide with wonder, taking in the cavernous ballroom, the orchestra playing on a raised stage, and the elaborate ice sculptures. This is fancier than the pictures, she whispered, clutching his hand. Just a bit, he whispered back. Orson, Piper, I'm so glad you could make it. Genevieve glided toward them. She was breathtaking. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. But it was her smile that truly transformed her. It was warm and unguarded, a smile he was starting to see more and more often. You look amazing, Ms. Ardeen, Piper said, her voice filled with awe. Thank you, Piper. And you look like a princess, Genevieve said, her gaze shifting to Orson. And you, Mr. Baird, clean up rather well. Orson felt a blush creep up his neck. "I try." The evening was a revelation. Genevieve didn't treat them like guests she was obligated to host. She stayed with them. She introduced them to people not as her employee, but as her friend. She listened with genuine interest as Piper explained her ideas for a robot that could sort recycling more efficiently. She watched, a small, private smile on her face, as Orson got into a deep, passionate debate with a university professor about the ethics of artificial intelligence. Later, while Piper was mesmerized by the robotics exhibit, Genevieve and Orson found a quiet corner on a balcony overlooking the city. "She's incredible, Orson," Genevieve said, watching Piper. "Yeah, she is. You've done a wonderful job raising her. I just tried to stay out of her way," he said with a self-deprecating smile. Genevieve turned to him, her expression serious. "No, that's not true. You gave up everything for her. You chose a life of hardship and invisibility to give her a life of peace and safety. That's not staying out of the way. That's love, the purest kind." He looked at her, surprised by the intensity in her voice. The city lights twinkled behind her, casting a halo around her. In that moment, she wasn't Genevieve Ardeen, the powerful CEO. She was just a woman, seeing him, truly seeing him, in a way no one had in a very long time. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. A slow song started to drift from the ballroom. Genevieve hesitated for a moment, then asked, Would you like to dance?" Orson's heart skipped a beat. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," she confessed with a small laugh. "We can be awkward together." She held out her hand. He took it. Her hand was warm in his as she led him to the edge of the dance floor. He placed one hand on her waist, the silk of her dress cool beneath his palm. She rested her other hand on his shoulder. They moved slowly, a bit stiffly at first. Two people from different worlds finding a new rhythm together. The space between them was charged with an unspoken energy. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume. He could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "You know," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I've been to 100 of these events. They're usually just work. Tonight is the first time I've actually had fun." "Me too," he admitted. He looked over her shoulder and saw Piper watching them from the edge of the room, a huge, knowing smile on her face. She gave him a thumbs up. He smiled back. As the song ended, they didn't move apart right away. They stood there in the middle of the crowded ballroom, a quiet island of their own. "Genevieve," he began, not sure what he was going to say. "I know," she whispered, as if she could read his mind. "Me too." The drive home was quiet. Piper fell asleep in the back seat, a contented smile on her face. Orson pulled up in front of their apartment building. The world a stark contrast to the opulence of the gala. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a step down. It just felt like home. He carried Piper upstairs and tucked her into bed. As he stood in her doorway, watching her sleep, he realized the walls he had built around his heart were gone. He had let the world in. Or rather, he had let her in. And it wasn't scary. It felt like coming home after a long, lonely journey. The next Monday at work, the atmosphere between them had shifted. There was a new warmth, an easy intimacy that hadn't been there before. They started having lunch together, not in the executive dining room, but in the park, on the same bench where they had sealed their professional deal. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about the pressure of living up to her father's legacy, the loneliness of being at the top. He told her stories about Piper, about his late wife, about the simple joys and sorrows of a life lived deliberately under the radar. He discovered that beneath the formidable CEO was a woman with a wry sense of humor and a surprising love for old black and white movies. She discovered that beneath the quiet, reserved cybersecurity genius was a man of deep feeling, fierce loyalty, and a strength that had nothing to do with physical power. One rainy Saturday afternoon, she came over to his apartment. She said she was bringing over some financial reports for him to look at, but they both knew it was an excuse. Piper, thrilled to have her new friend over, insisted they all build a pillow fort in the living room. And so, Genevieve Ardeen, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor under a fortress of blankets and couch cushions, drinking hot chocolate from a chipped mug and playing a card game with a 10-year-old girl and a former janitor. She was laughing, a real, uninhibited laugh, when she caught Orson looking at her. The laughter died on her lips, replaced by a soft smile. "What?" she asked. "I've just never seen you like this," he said. "Under a pillow fort." "I've never been under a pillow fort," she confessed. "My childhood was more about board meetings and strategic planning." Piper, sensing a shift in the mood, suddenly declared, "I have to go, check on my griffin colony in my room." She scrambled out of the fort, leaving them alone in the dimly lit space. The air grew thick with unspoken words. Orson reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut for a brief moment. "Genevieve," he said, his voice low. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Orson." He didn't need to say anything else. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, hesitant kiss at first, a question. She answered by kissing him back, her hand coming up to cup his face. The kiss deepened, filled with all the weeks of shared lunches, late-night talks, and quiet, stolen glances. It was a kiss that sealed a deal far more important than any corporate contract. When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together. "So," she whispered, a smile in her voice, "does this complicate our working relationship?" "Immensely," he whispered back, smiling too. "But I think we can handle it." Their relationship became a quiet, open secret at Veridian. No announcements were made, but people noticed. They saw the way the CEO's eyes softened when she spoke to the head of the threat analysis group. They saw the easy companionship, the shared smiles. And no one said a word. It just felt right. 6 months later, they were in the park again, watching Piper fly a kite. It was a perfect autumn day, the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. "I've been thinking," Genevieve said, her head resting on his shoulder. "A dangerous pastime for you," he teased. She nudged him. "I've been thinking about families, about what makes a family." He looked at Piper, her face alight with joy as the kite soared higher. "I think I'm looking at it." "Me too," she said softly. She sat up and turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. Her expression was serious, vulnerable. "Orson Baird, you are the kindest, strongest, most honorable man I have ever known. You and Piper, you've shown me what a home is supposed to feel like." She took a deep breath. "I know this is fast, and I know our lives are unconventional, but I don't want to spend another day without you being my family, officially." Orson's heart stopped. "Genevieve, are you—" "I'm asking you to marry me, you fool," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "I know it's usually the other way around, but I've never been one for tradition." He stared at her, speechless. Then he started to laugh, a deep, happy laugh that came from his soul. "What's so funny?" she asked, a mock-offended look on her face. "I was going to ask you tonight," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, simple box. "I guess you just beat me to it." He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, a thin silver band with a single, tiny sapphire. The color of Piper's favorite dress. Genevieve gasped, tears now freely streaming down her cheeks. "Genevieve Ardeen," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I love you more than I have words to say. You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me back my voice, and you built a pillow fort with my daughter. There's no question. Yes! 1,000 times, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tight. The sounds of the city fading away, until there was only the two of them. From across the field, they heard a cheer. Piper was running toward them, her kite trailing behind her. "Did you ask her, Dad? Did she say yes?" "She beat me to it, Pip," Orson laughed, pulling his daughter into their hug. "But the answer is yes." The three of them stood there, a small, improbable, and perfectly formed family, huddled together under the brilliant autumn sky, ready to start their next chapter. The wedding was not a grand affair. There were no press releases, no society photographers. It took place on a crisp spring afternoon in the garden of Genevieve's childhood home, a place she hadn't visited in years. The guests were a small collection of their closest friends, Orson's small team of misfits, and a handful of board members who had become their staunchest supporters. Piper was the maid of honor, looking radiant in a sapphire blue dress that matched her mother-to-be's new ring. She held the simple wedding bands on a small silk pillow. Orson stood under a beautiful old oak tree, watching Genevieve walk down the grassy aisle toward him. She wasn't wearing a traditional white gown, but a simple, elegant cream-colored dress that flowed in the gentle breeze. She looked happy, at peace, her eyes fixed only on him. When she reached him, she took his hands. They didn't exchange long, flowery vows. Their promises were simple, quiet, and true, spoken from the heart. "I promise to always see you," he said to her, "even when you try to hide behind the title of CEO. And I promise to always listen to you," she said to him, "even when you're telling me a truth I don't want to hear." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Orson didn't just kiss his bride. He pulled her and Piper into a three-way hug, a perfect circle of love. The small crowd erupted into warm, heartfelt applause. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Genevieve found Orson standing alone by a small pond, watching the koi swim. "Regretting it already?" she teased, wrapping her arms around him from behind. He chuckled and leaned back against her. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how a single act of truth can change a life. I sent that email just to stop something bad from happening. I never imagined." He trailed off, shaking his head in wonder. "I never imagined it would lead to this. To you. To us." She rested her cheek against his back. "My father always said the best investments are the ones you make in people of character. I invested in a ghost, and he turned out to be the love of my life." He turned in her arms to face her. "And I fell in love with a CEO who was brave enough to look past a janitor's uniform to see the man underneath." He kissed her, a long, slow kiss full of promise for the years to come. From across the lawn, Piper waved at them, her smile as bright as the setting sun. That night, long after the guests had gone and Piper was asleep upstairs in the big house, Orson sat at a small desk in the library. He pulled a worn leather journal from his bag, a gift from Genevieve. He opened it to the first page and wrote, "Some people spend their lives building walls to keep the world out. But I've learned that the strongest walls are not made of stone or code. They are the arms of your family. Today, my fortress is complete." He closed the journal and looked out the window at the stars. The ghost of Nix was finally at peace. Orson Baird was home. To those who have ever felt overlooked, misunderstood, or invisible, remember this: your worth is not determined by your title or the recognition you receive. It is measured by your integrity, your courage, and the quiet truths you choose to uphold when no one is watching. Life has a funny way of rewarding silent strength, often when you least expect it. The right people will see you, not for what you do, but for who you are. If this story resonated with you, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories of hope can travel. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just brighten your day. Your support helps us continue to create content that inspires and uplifts. Thank you for being here. Until next time. Keep believing in the quiet power of a good heart.